The winter holidays stress me out. I know everybody says that, but it's true all the same. I don't like the cold, I don't like the crowds, I don't like ritually mandated merriment, so yeah, not really my scene. Don't misunderstand, I'm no Scrooge. I like Christmas movies, Christmas decorations, gift giving, the whole shebang is fine by me. I just don't know that it needs to be drawn out over an entire month. It's all about the proper compartmentalization. For me, Christmas is a holiday that exists for a couple of hours on Christmas Eve, a couple more hours on Christmas Day, intermittent half-hour bursts surrounding the watching of this or that TV special, and outside of that, I'd rather just go on with my normal routine, thank you very much. Anyway, each year I cope with my stresses by pouring through some big honkin' DVD collection. Last year it was the entire original series of Ultraman. This year the timing has worked out for it to be the 14th season of The Simpsons. Ah, so many good memories here. The island of Dr. Hibbert, Moe hanging out with Maggie, Homer taking over a church, Bart and Lisa being in the same class, Homer and Sideshow Bob versus Frank Grimes Jr., and at least half of you have already checked out to grouse about how the show isn't funny anymore, or hasn't been funny anymore since season 9, or season 10, or The Principal and the Pauper, or that 90s show, or Behind the Laughter, or whenever it is that you went off to college and or otherwise found something else to do on Sunday night and were no longer obsessively following it week to week. See, the whole notion that The Simpsons has somehow suffered some directly identifiable downward tumble in quality has always mystified me. I mean, has it perhaps been on the air for a little too long? Probably. Have certain characters and or traits become somewhat overworn now that the show has effectively outlived the entire late 80s, early 90s television miasma it was intended to parody? Absolutely. But where everybody else seems to see a series that used to be perfect gone to crap, I see a show that has always had a certain amount of ups and downs, but has stayed pretty consistently above average. Put another way, I don't so much disagree with folks that the series has produced its share of clunkers in recent years, as I question whether or not my generation has overstated the sheen of its apparent golden age. See, in terms of relationship dynamics between a TV or movie or whatever franchise and its fans, The Simpsons is utterly unique. Seriously, looking back, I'd be hard-pressed to find any other instance that's been remotely similar. Let me explain. Now, while exceptions do exist, it seems to me that a certain majority of disappointed hardcore Simpsons fanatics are also unsurprisingly Ground Zero Generation 1 fans roughly in my relative age bracket. Now, let's be brutally honest here. When we first discovered The Simpsons, it probably wasn't the incisive pop culture satire or smart, snarky comic writing that first drew us in. More likely, it was that there was a cartoon with cursing, then controversial violence, family dysfunction played for laughs, and a smart-ass kid who sassed authority figures and got away with it. Speaking only for myself, though I bet I'm far from alone in this case, I loved The Simpsons when I first watched it as a grade schooler in much the same way and for much the same reasons I loved, say, He-Man or the Ninja Turtles. Hey, it's okay. We were kids. You don't generally develop refined tastes until you get older, which is why, looking back, some of the quote-unquote classic Simpsons episodes that I thought were the best ones ever at the time, like, say, Bart the General or Some Enchanted Evening, seem kind of, lacking when I watched them as an adult, while others I'd originally considered the boring ones, like Life on the Fast Lane, come off much better. It's a rite of passage. You grow up, your tastes change, you realize some stuff you really loved as a kid doesn't quite hold up like you'd want it to. Maybe it just wasn't very good to begin with. Maybe it was still fun but compromised in annoying ways you were too young to pick up on at the time. Maybe it was promising but primitively executed. But basically, doesn't hold up is going to be the rule. This is why my generation loves irony so much. Appreciating our trashy nostalgia with a veneer of snarky, hey, I know it's lame, but that's why I still like it detachment is how we've avoided letting it go altogether. But with The Simpsons, a funny thing happened. We got older, and it didn't suddenly get worse. It got better. Or rather, it had always been good, but now we could appreciate just how good in a different way. We might have moved on from thinking that cherry bombs and graffiti and ay caramba were the coolest things on earth, but now we could groove on, incisive showbiz satire, everyday working class annoyances, and the existential ennui of being a smarty pants trapped in a dumbed-down world, all punctuated by a rotating staff of extremely talented comedy writers. That was the real miracle of The Simpsons' golden age, thanks largely to a parody of the bad little boy sitcom archetype briefly becoming an actual phenomenon with kids, and winning a massive grade school audience for a show that was originally intended for an older primetime viewership. It was able to become for those same kids one of the few precious entertainments of their childhood that was still just as awesome, if perhaps in a different way, as they grew up through their teens and into young adulthood. That, my friends, is how something goes from being simply a good TV show to a full-blown, unassailable pop culture institution. And since the timeline of that quote-unquote institutionalization roughly coincides with the first 9 to 10 years of the series, guess which seasons tend to be remembered as the best ones. So yeah, from where I sit, that is how The Simpsons earned a legacy of such high standard that even The Simpsons couldn't live up to it anymore. The question then becomes, what, if anything, did change to earn the show its now lessened current reputation? Well, I'll tell you what I think next time. Last week I said that The Simpsons was still funny, a phrase which, on the internet anyway, is right up there with saying, you know, that Stalin wasn't that bad of a fellow, or Minecraft is overrated, or offering up for discussion whether Friendship is Magic or Adventure Time is the better show. Anyway, though I stand by my overall premise that the widespread disillusionment with this particular series has more to do with a change in the audience's habits and expectations than it does with some consistent drop in overall quality, I do agree that The Simpsons isn't quite what it used to be. Notice that I've chosen my words carefully, i.e. I did not say that it wasn't as good as it used to be, just that it's not precisely the same creature. After all, what is The Simpsons? This is actually harder to answer than it seems, because the show has existed and been a major pop culture force for so long that it's more of an institution unto itself. But originally, in the before time, in the long, long ago, it had a pretty specific identity. The Simpsons was an absurdist parody. My contention, then, is that the reason it's different now is less because the show itself has changed, but that the world around it has changed, to the extent that almost everything it first existed to skewer, satirize, and parody doesn't exist anymore. When The Simpsons first appeared as short subjects on The Tracey Ullman Show in 1987, it was an analog world with no internet, at least not as we understand it today, and without even an appreciably large amount of cable television. American popular culture was still driven overwhelmingly by the same basic forces that had driven it since the 1950s. 3 major television networks, a smattering of local affiliates, and the newspaper magazine industry. While niche entertainment and subcultures existed, there simply wasn't any way for them to be as large or self-sustaining as they can be today in the digital age. Everyone may not have watched or even liked the same programs or followed the same news, but by and large everyone was aware of the same programs and news, because there just wasn't that much else for everyone to be aware of. So when The Simpsons showed up embodying exaggerated characters of the formula sitcom family, colorful dad, saintly mom, one troublemaking kid, one smart kid, the baby, guest starring relatives, wacky neighbors, evil bosses, everyone got it. Immediately. The show's humor was universal, not because it was mocking scenarios that resembled everyone's real life, but because it was mocking the version of real life that everyone had been force-fed by the programming of the monolithically influential Big Three for the last 3 decades of TV watching. I mean, I was a 10-year-old boy when I started watching The Simpsons. Could I relate to stories about a dad getting in trouble for dancing with a stripper, or a mother having a nervous breakdown and going to a spa, or that same dad becoming a union boss? Of course not. But I got the parody because I too had seen those same damn storylines used over and over on every real family sitcom I'd ever watched. American pop culture during the so-called golden age of The Simpsons was a pop monoculture, and Bart, Homer, Marge, Lisa, and Maggie were its most widely circulated satirists. Make a joke about a TV show or some big news story, and chances are almost everyone would get it. And then something happened at the tail end of the 1990s, a period that dovetails nicely with where a lot of dissatisfied fans claim The Simpsons began to lose its luster. The Internet. When what was then called the information superhighway first became accessible to average American homes, the big idea was that it was going to unify the culture like never before. Instead, it did exactly the opposite of that. Previously, being a fan or a follower of a property or movement that wasn't part of the cultural mainstream took a lot of work and was often wholly dependent on folks of a similar disposition living in close proximity. With the advent of the internet, aficionados of any aspect of the cultural outskirts, be it an obscure TV show, a forgotten movie, a fringe political movement, could find each other instantly. Combine this with streaming, Netflix, satellites, and an ever-growing roster of cable channels, and there's basically nothing in the popular culture that can truly be said to be shared by everyone anymore. Everything has become fragmented, everything is niche, and everyone is part of this or that fandom, subculture, or political label. The only time in the last decade that anything close to a majority of American media consumers can be said to have all been focused on the same basic thing was 9/11. Now, I don't think that's a bad thing. The specificity of audiences has allowed niche genres and shows to thrive. Game of Thrones or Dexter or Spartacus definitely would never have survived in a non-fragmented television landscape, for example. But the transformation also leaves a show like The Simpsons, which was designed to broadly skewer a mass audience's collective TV watching and world-observing experience, without much of a foundation. The characters in their world were everymen, built purposefully broad in order to fit into any scenario. Every dad, every mom, every son, every daughter, every bartender, every mole man. But the popular culture just doesn't produce that many every-anythings anymore. So what else can such broad characters do but go from exaggerated caricatures of other things to exaggerated caricatures of their own established personas? And while I don't personally feel that this has made them worse, what it has made them is less vital and certainly less relatable. That said, so long as the show can keep its now legendary main voice cast and still attract good writers, I do think it'll remain one of the better things on TV for however long it wants to stick around. So yeah, that's my theory on the matter. And since you can't end one of these without doing it, my top 5 episodes of all time are Last Exit to Springfield, Treehouse of Horror 1, Cape Fear, 24 Minutes, and 22 short films about Springfield. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture.